following program is closed captioned for the thinking impaired.
Sprawy związane z dalszym rozwojem województwa i kraju.
All systems go.
Alright, today in this video I want to go over my most recent build. I'm just going to do kind of a basic overview of the entire build, and then later on I'll come back with some other videos doing full reviews on the individual components. First off, every build you have to decide what your primary use of it is going to be. For me, I'm maybe a 10 to 20% gamer. The rest of it's probably going to be we'll say 60% productivity, and then another 20% just random everyday use like web surfing. So I wanted something that had the capability of raw power for computational purposes, compiling, video editing, things like that. Something that had just horsepower enough to actually crunch numbers really well. I don't mind some. I do game, so but it's not very often. So I did want something that could game, but one of the main things that I run on my machines, I don't run Windows. The only thing I even have Windows accessible for for any reason is purely games. I don't do any other functions on a Windows platform. Everything I run is Linux, and I run Arch Linux. So most of my builds are kind of catered towards that particular environment. Not so much games, but mostly I wanted to make sure it's compatible with Linux. I want to make sure that it's functional for productivity purposes primarily, and but still has the capability of doing some basic gaming. So I do like playing some more modern games which require a little more horsepower, so you have to make sure that it's capable of at least doing that in a playable format. So in this video I'm going to go through this build, and with that in mind, with my requirements in mind, that's what I built this particular machine for. So my component selection was based on that idea. So I'm going to go through each one of the components one by one, and like I said, I'll do individual reviews on each component in their own videos, so that we don't take up too much time on this particular video. For the case, my primary interest is appearance and capacity. So this particular case had everything that I wanted in it. It had room for the radiators. It's going to be a liquid cooled solution. It has a radiator, room for a 280 radiator in the front, 240 radiator in the top, and I even custom engineered the case to make sure that I could use a 120 radiator in the back fan slot. So it's got 3 radiators total in this particular build. It had room for the motherboard that I used. I try to keep my builds fairly small. They don't have to be micro small, but I want them fairly small because of the location where I put my tower is in a cabinet, and that cabinet only has so much room inside, so I try to keep the case capable of fitting inside the cabinet. So it has to be fairly compact. This case pretty much ticked off all the boxes. The overall point is once I know it has everything that I need, then from there it's about the appearance, and I just think this case looks really cool, so that's why I went with this one. Any negative aspects of it, generally I can custom fabricate pretty much anything I need to. If something doesn't work, then I can just re-engineer it my own way and get it to work. Like this particular case, in order to get the 120 radiator in the back, it's actually mounted on the outside of the case, so I had to re-engineer the case in order to make that work. But when I finally got it all figured out and completed it works fantastic. So that's the case I went with. As far as motherboard goes, I had a choice of basically I came down to three choices when it came to motherboards. So there was the Asus motherboard, there was the Gigabyte Extreme, Aorus Extreme, Asus, I think it was the Hero or something like that. Basically all the highest end boards you could think of at the time. There was three major companies that I was normally I'm an ASRock fan, but unfortunately they just didn't have anything that gave me all the capabilities that I wanted this time. One of the things I really don't like, my boards, I always use a dedicated graphics card. So what I don't want on the motherboard is a video output. I don't use it. I have no need for it, and I think it just takes up space. And in that regard, the three companies that were basically in the that I was trying to decide between was the Gigabit Aorus Extreme, the Asus Hero 4, I think it was. I don't remember. The Asus's high-end one. I don't remember what it is for the Ryzen desktop. And then this particular board, which is the one I went with, was the Prestige from MSI. It's the X570 Creation from MSI. This board, compared to the other two that I was considering, it has all the features you could possibly ask for, and it was $300 cheaper than the other two boards. Honestly, I just couldn't go wrong with that. So I went this direction. I have there's some caveats to any product, but I'll get into more detail on that when I do an actual review of this board. But this is the board I ended up going with just because for the price, you can't get any other board that has all the same features, even remotely close to this price range. The I/O panel on this particular board is fantastic. There is USB plugs, everything you could possibly want. They really did a good job of utilizing all the available space on the I/O panel. So this board was fantastic. So that's the reason I ended up going with that particular board. This particular board is because the cost comparison versus the amount of things that you get with this board was just phenomenal. It was amazing. So I went with this particular board for the build. The processor, like I said, it's a Ryzen build. I went with the 3950X. Like I said, most of my stuff is productivity and 16 cores, 32 threads. This processor is unbeatable, basically, especially at this cost, at this price range. This processor is fantastic. For productivity purposes, you cannot get a more valuable purchase than this particular processor. I mean, performance-wise, it's phenomenal, and for the cost that you get for the amount of performance you get, it's crazy that you get this much performance for the cost that it's at. So it was the natural choice for me to go that direction for the processor. As far as graphics card goes, like I said, maybe 20% of my workload is going to be gaming, so I wanted something that had more horsepower for rendering, things of that nature, productivity purposes. And as far as that goes, the Radeon 7 was a no-brainer for me. I get probably 96% of the performance that you get out of a purely gaming card when it comes to games. But as far as number crunching and real hard, laborious work, as far as computational purposes and stuff like that, this card for this price, I got it for about $500 because it had already been out for a while, and you can't beat that price versus the amount of performance that you get out of it. In order to get a card that compares to this, you'd have to double to triple the price in order to get a card that's even close to being able to perform as well as this card does for what I use it for. And it's fully capable. It's 96% as fast as anything that's comparable to it, so when it comes to gaming. So it was an easy choice for me to pick that card for this build. For power supplies, I'm normally an Antec fan. I love Antec's power supplies, but during this build we were having problems getting any power supplies. Antec was completely unavailable. I couldn't find anything anywhere, and the reality is I'm kind of glad Antec is fantastic, and they always have been. But I'm glad that I wasn't able to get one in this particular build because it gave me an opportunity to research other possibilities. And so I ended up on this particular power supply, which is the LeadX Titanium 1000 watt. And I'm glad I ended up finding this particular power supply because normally I would have just never even questioned it. And the power supplies have come a long way, and I'm glad that I had to actually broaden my horizons a little bit because this power supply is fantastic. I have had no problems with it, and I'm really satisfied with it. So I'm glad I had to kind of open up a little bit on that particular one. As for memory, Crucial's always been good to me. I've always had good luck with them. I love Micron chips. They're awesome. The Ryzen Infinity Fabric runs maximum about 1800 megahertz, so 3600 memory is pretty ideal. That's why I went with 3600. That way I can run the Infinity Fabric at its maximum performance. And the timings on this particular memory at 3600 are amazing. But like I said, Micron chips and Crucial have always done really well for me. So as far as storage goes, the X570 chipset on the MSI motherboard is capable of PCIe 4. When it came down to it, I don't need the speed that's available from PCIe 4, especially when you consider the astronomical cost difference. The reality is I'd rather spend less on more capacity with 90% of the speed than I would for what it would have took for me to get the same capacity at the PCIe 4 mark. The cost would have been double to triple again, and it's just not worth it. So I went for this particular build. I went with the CS 3030s from PNY, and they've been fantastic. I get more than adequate speed, and the cost was infinitely better. So I just went with the PCIe 3.0 CS 3030s. I've got two of them in the box. One is a 1 terabyte, and the other one is a 2 terabyte. They're both mounted on the onboard on the motherboard on the NVMe 2 slots. So they work great. For large capacity storage, I still use spinning disks because the cost is just much better, and just for long-term storage you don't need the high speeds. So the spinning disks work fine. And UltraStars, Western Digital UltraStars have always been really reliable, and that's pretty much my main concern when it comes to a large spinning disk, large capacity storage, is reliability. They've always lasted me a long time. So I put two of those in this build. One's a 4 terabyte and one's an 8 terabyte just for long-term storage. And then as for the cooling solution, the water pump and reservoir, I like the way Corsair packages this particular kit. It comes with everything you need for the reservoir and the pump. It's a D5 pump, so you're not sacrificing anything as far as performance is concerned. The overall packaging is great. They give you all the fittings and all the brackets and everything you need to get this in your system and get it going. So I thought it was a great value overall, and you're getting D5 pump performance out of it anyway. So I thought this was a easy sell for me. It came with everything I needed to get it in and going. So that's why I went with that particular one. Some people have complained because it's made out of plastic, but that hasn't been an issue for me at all. Normally I would have preferred glass, but the reality is this has been running perfectly fine, so I haven't had any issues with it. The radiators, I went with Alpha Cool's ST30s. I went with the Crossflow ones, the X-Flows. Like I said, there's 3 of them in the case. I've got a 280 in the front, a 240 in the top, and a 120 in the back. So I went with those particular radiators. For Waterblocks, I used EK Velocity Waterblock on the CPU, and both the CPU and graphics card are water cooled. And for the GPU, I use the EK Vector Radeon 7 water block. So both of those are with EK's water blocks on them. And as far as fans go, I used EK's Vardar fans. I've got these Furious 140s on the front radiator. I got 2 of those on the 280 on the front, and I got 2 of these EK Vardar 120s on the top, 240 radiator, and 1 on the back 120 radiator. But that's all the components that I used. Like I said, I'll come back later and actually do a more detailed review of each individual component in their own separate videos, so that I can kind of keep this particular video as short as possible. But if there's anything you'd like me to touch on specifically, just leave it down in the comments below. If you have any questions or anything else, just let me know. Put them right there in the comments, and I'll try to get back to them as soon as I can. But that's the overall build. So thanks for watching the video, and come back and see the individual reviews, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thanks for watching.
Omówiono najważniejsze sprawy związane z dalszym rozwojem województwa i kraju.
You can't handle the truth!
Shutdown sequence initiated. Shutting down.